Solopreneur Attorneys YouTube channel where I deep dive into 99 ways to find your next client. If you haven't already got the download, click below, get your hands on it. It is chock full of 99 ways to find your next clients. This channel is dedicated to helping you make sure you always have a consistent stream of clients coming to you. Now, this week I am diving into sponsoring conferences, which is number 14 on the list of 99 ways to find your next client. This actually is my favorite way that I found clients when I had just launched my firm. Because when I launched my firm, I had a good stream of clients, but they were all from this certain industry. And I quickly, I think within like 6 months, I started running into conflicts in my firm. And I was like, okay, I can't have this going on. So I knew I had to branch out just into an entirely new industry. And I knew, oh, let me just find an industry conference to go to. And my first conference to sponsor was Podcast Movement. And I always say that conference really put me on the map as far as people realizing who I was. And it's still our highest return on investment when it comes to conferences today. So we've sponsored it since 2019 and every year since. And the thing is, when you sponsor conferences, you're really thinking outside the box, especially when it comes to industry conferences. I was a baby attorney, barely licensed, and no other attorney, no other small firm was sponsoring Podcast Movement. I knew that podcasting was a newer industry and they're all creators. They all had questions. They didn't know what they were doing when it comes to the legal side of business. So the fact that I was there in front of them, so many people came up to me at my booth. And they're like, oh my gosh, I've been thinking about this stuff. I've been thinking about trademarks. I've been thinking about this. I didn't know how to find someone. And it's stressful for people to have to think about having to go and find an attorney. Most of the time, the only instances where people are actively looking for an attorney is when an issue is going on. If they get that cease and desist letter, if they get sued, they're like, oh shit, I have to find an attorney. Otherwise, they're like, oh, I'll just keep putting it off and putting it off, unless you're right there in front of them. So I remember that first conference, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm never not sponsoring this conference ever again because the return was crazy. And so I encourage you, no matter what industry, no matter what your practice area is, go find conferences that are getting in front of your ideal client. And let's say if you are a family law attorney, or let's say you do prenups, you should be at every bridal extravaganza in your city, in your state. If you are a trademark attorney, go to different industry conferences. So this year we're doing a permanent makeup conference. So if you work with small businesses, identify different industries that you can really niche down in. Because I know that, especially when I first started my entrepreneurial career, I was really annoyed when people say, oh, their riches are in the niches. It's like, okay, yeah, great, whatever. No, I'm just going to reach everybody. But it is so true. And I get it. Everybody's on their own path. You don't get it until you get it. But I was so niche down in certain industries for so long. And now we do have a much wider net. But what really made us a lot of money at first was niching down hardcore. And like I said, we did run into conflicts, which was fine. We just handled it. But that's when you'll realize, okay, now I have to get into another niche. So really niche down, hit that niche hard. And once you start to run into conflicts, hit another one. And those people are just going to talk. And then eventually you don't really have to niche down as much. So don't be afraid to, number one, niche down. Number two, don't be afraid to sponsor a conference. The first one that I sponsored, Podcast Movement, I was scared as hell. I think I ended up paying a total of like $3,000 or $4,000. And that was to have a booth. I had an insert in the bag, and I think I had like a quarter-page ad or something like that. And I took my brother with me, and that was a hit. Make sure you always have somebody that, if you don't have a team, make sure you take somebody that is outgoing and can talk to other people. And he even now, he hasn't gone back with me, but even now when I go to Podcast Movement, everybody's like, where's your brother? How's your brother doing? So having somebody that can really be outgoing and help market network with you, it's great. So sponsor conferences, start with the cheap ones, pay $100 to have a booth. If you're a family law attorney, find a conference that will work for you. If you're a criminal law attorney, I have a lot of ideas. So no matter what your niche, like what practice area you're in, drop me a comment. I can definitely throw some ideas at you. And you really just have to think outside the box. And it's an investment. 100% it is an investment, but you are investing in the firm of your dreams. So even though it's scary, you got to do it anyway. I will never forget how scared I was that first conference. Oh, I was like, oh my, and I was married at the time. And so I never told my ex-husband how much any of my investments were for my law firm because he would have flipped out, but that's neither here nor there. That's a whole nother YouTube channel. But I was so scared, but I also knew, like I was scared, but I knew. I was like, it has to work. There's nobody else. I made sure, I was like, there's no other attorneys there, right? And there's other attorneys that attend, and there's other attorneys that even speak, but because you have a booth, people are going to see you as more of an expert. They're going to come to you because you're there. You're right there in front of them. So always make sure that you not just attend conferences, but you sponsor and have a booth. I can't tell you like that on the entire list. This is by far my favorite method because not a lot of attorneys think about it. And if they do, they're like, it's too expensive. It won't work for me. I got to buy. And you do need to buy, things for your booth, which pictures of that first booth are pretty funny, but you grow from there. You got to start somewhere. So just get started. Things will always change. You can improve your booth later, but as long as you have something, people can be like, oh, wow, I never thought about having an attorney here, or this is great that an attorney is here. I've been thinking about talking to this type of attorney or whatever. So don't be afraid. I know it's scary, but you got to do it anyway. Drop me a comment with what your practice area is, and I can give you some ideas for what types of conferences. All right. If you haven't already got your 99 Ways download, click it, get it. Let me know if you have questions. I'll see you next week.